Hello everybody and welcome to the first in our series of our alumni Afterthoughts sessions, which is part of a wider Social Sciences Careers Week that we're running in collaboration with the Universities of York, Sheffield and Leeds. I'm very grateful for you all joining us today, and we've got two excellent speakers who I will be shortly inviting to join us. Before we get started, I just wanted to run through a couple of things about the session. So the session's going to work with the first 30 to 40 minutes, with me having a conversation with our two guest speakers, Ella and Anna. And following that, we will be opening this up to a live Q&A. So please, throughout the session, feel free to put in any questions that you'd like to ask our speakers. We will also be incorporating some of your pre-submitted questions as part of the discussion beforehand. Apologies in advance if we don't manage to get through all your questions, but we will do our best. In terms of, you might have noticed that we've got live captioning on. You are welcome to turn this off if you like. If you hover down at the bottom, it will give you an option to turn off. Before I introduce our two speakers, there is one other person that I'd like to introduce you to, and that is Laura Evans from Nifty Fox Creative. Laura is going to be here live scribing our sessions and putting together two profile pieces of our speakers. So Laura, if I could invite you to explain a little bit about what it is that you do.
Hi everyone, thank you Josie. So I'm in the tiny corner of your screen here, but I can be bigger. Hang on, let me do that so you can actually see my face. Hello everybody. So as Josie said, my name's Laura from Nifty Fox and I'm your live scribe for today. So what that means is that I'll be live illustrating the lovely words of our amazing speakers to turn that into an image that you can take away with you afterwards, so you can remember everything that's said and you'll have a visual representation of what you've heard today. So there'll be a link posted in the chat as to where you can go and download those after the session, but you'll notice that my camera, in terms of this camera, goes off and you'll be able to see what's happening on my iPad screen directly throughout the event. So you can always spotlight me at different points to see what's going on. But thank you for having me, and I'll see you at the end for a summary.
Brilliant, thanks Laura. And like Laura mentions, we will be welcoming her back, so you will get to see exactly what it is that she's created. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite both Ella and Anna to unveil themselves so that we can get our session started. Brilliant, thank you. So Ella Moonen-Howard is a research fellow at Zinc, but along with that, she's also a gerontology PhD student at the University of Southampton. And Dr. Anna Huschlack is a co-founder and chief scientific officer at a femtech company, Furley. So thank you both of you. It's really fantastic to have you both here with us today. I'd like to start the session by giving our attendees a bit of a glimpse into what it is that you do on kind of a day-to-day basis. So I wondered, Ella, if I could start with you, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about what it is that you do at Zinc, the responsibilities you have, and kind of what a typical day might be for you at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. It's a real privilege. So Zinc are a social impact incubator company, essentially. So they work to create early stage ventures that address one of a number of key issues or missions. Those are problem spaces which are hard to tackle and involve a large number of people. And they do that by getting together a group of a really diverse range of people to come together before they have an idea of how they might tackle it. And Anna was one of the entrepreneurs I'm sure she'll talk about on our first program, to essentially create businesses that solve one of those missions. I came on board with Zinc on their third mission, which was all about adding 5 extra high quality years to later life, as my research background is all in aging and healthy aging and gerontology, as Josie said. So as a research fellow, I work to essentially help bridge the gap between entrepreneurship and innovation and academia and research. So on a day-to-day basis, that means bringing research that's been done to the attention of the founders on the programs. So that might be communicating papers, doing literature reviews, answering questions, taking workshops, events, those sorts of things. Also trying to accelerate out the new learning that is conducted within the ventures to the wider academic community and beyond. And then developing partnerships between founders and ventures and academics and research organizations to accelerate the creation of new research in partnership between those two.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Ella. What a diverse role you have. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Anna, if I could ask the same question, really, if you could talk to us a bit about Furley and kind of what it is like to be a co-founder and what that entails.
Yeah, so Furley itself, as Ella mentioned, came off the back of Zinc, and it was all around using technology to improve the mental and emotional health of women and girls. So a lot of that for us was around looking at the science, looking at all the information, looking at all the shit information, the bad information. How do we filter through this, and how do we actually deliver that in our case, in an app to women and folks with vulvas who would like to have healthier, more confident, more pleasurable sex. In terms of my role with that, I mean, as often happens in a startup, you kind of do whatever needs to be done. But the main areas that I would work across would be the kind of the research and science side of things, definitely the impact and how do we actually measure efficacy, which for us is really important. And then I also look at, in our instance, the product itself. So everything from user research to product design to product strategy. And I look at the content that's going in there, because we have kind of educational sessions, if you would, and how those weave together. And then we're also looking at building out a community to have that in there as a support space. So it's I would say the interweaving of content, community, and product, all rooted in a strong background of science, which is like very much in the DNA of what we do.
That's great, thank you. And just following on from that, obviously you mentioned the partnership that you had with Zinc to help you get your startup going. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what actually motivated you to go down that route, so what it was that made you think, yes, I want to kind of take this idea and turn it into a business.
Yeah, definitely. Ella, do you want to kick off and I can go afterwards?
As in, what motivated me to join Zinc?
Yeah.
So I was really interested in doing something that I felt had impact. I think I wasn't sure exactly what that meant necessarily, but and I'm passionate about aging and passionate about the mission space. Was 2 years or so into my PhD and had explored a number of potential options for where I might take that research interest. Obviously, academia being the most obvious one. Had done some work in charities or sort of third sector. Had thought about local government, national government, but hadn't really considered, well, I didn't know anything about the startup world, to be honest. And it was a complete unknown to me. So when the opportunity which was initially an internship, my PhD is with the South Coast Doctoral Training Partnership, and they facilitated this internship. It was just the opportunity to work in a space that was entirely new and different to me, but equally based on lots of the values and principles that appealed to me. So a real commitment to doing things in an evidence-based way and a scientific way, a real commitment to the end users, the impact, essentially making things good, doing things well and doing things good. But also the opportunity to work in a more fast-paced, creative, sort of fluid, flexible way with lots of different people, and really collaboratively, which I think that I personally have found my PhD journey to lack some of those. I think at times it can feel a little bit slow and isolated, not as collaborative as it could do. So.
No, thank you, Ella. That's really, really insightful. And would you say a lot of those feelings were the reason that you decided to take a pause with your PhD and then pursue something that wasn't a more fast-paced environment?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And Anna, could you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to start Furley?
Yeah, definitely. I think very similar to what Ella was saying. I think so my PhD journey was actually a really frustrating one, which I think for a lot of us it is, and we don't necessarily realize how frustrating it can be until we get through it and we're like, okay, survived. But so I think similarly from a kind of career perspective, I never really knew what I wanted to do. And I kept doing academia because it was something I was good at and it was something that was familiar to me, but it's not necessarily something that I realized later on gave me that sense of purpose, so something that I believed in the same way as other areas that I could transition into. I think the kind of big thing where there were recurring threads around interest in social impact, interest in creating change, interest in democratizing knowledge, and these kind of, recurrent themes. And I thought academia would be one way of actually acting on those. Like Ella worked quite a bit in the nonprofit sector. And I think towards the end of my PhD, one of the things that I found really frustrating was exactly that pace. And I think for me, the other aspect of it was, so a lot of my research looked at activism and online communities. And I think one of the things that, I remember in doing all my interviews that kept coming up was like, so what is this research actually going to do? How is this actually going to help this activism? By the time you publish it, by the time it gets reviewed, by the time you release it, these campaigns will be a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. So like, what's the purpose of what you're doing? And obviously I think, academia in and of itself serves a massive purpose. But I think for me, there was a little bit of a disconnection between, particularly around activism and social movements and creating change, the ability to be able to do that with my research versus being able to do that through running a business. And also, I think another thing that we often don't talk about is the autonomy in funding. So when running your own business, obviously, like that comes with its own implications. But unlike what I found, academia and grants and the charity sector and funding, there's a little bit more flexibility and power over how you use your money and less distraction having to report back in the same way. So yeah, I think a big decision was getting to the end of the PhD being like, I have no idea what I want to do, but I know that the things that I've been trying aren't really working. And I know that there's certain like themes and missions, if you would, that I'm interested in. And starting a business seems like an interesting way of experiencing that and experimenting with that in a way that gives me more autonomy over the decision making, more ability to actually work with communities themselves. And in some ways, I think, more of a sense of like purpose and belief in what I'm doing every day, because I can see the immediate impacts of those initiatives we're running on the ground. So I think that was a big transition for me. So very, very similar to Ella's.
No, fantastic. Thank you. And I think what you're saying about not really knowing what you want to do will resonate a lot with our PhDs and even our ECRs who maybe feel a bit stuck in academia because they're not quite sure what that next step it looks like, but they've got these skills that they can use. I just wondered, both of you, if you kind of had any advice about someone in that position, what it is that they could be doing, what they could be looking for maybe, to try and kind of step away from the academic side and actually, whether it's pursuing a business or going to work in a business in the private sector or elsewhere. So Anna, if I start with you and then come to
yeah, definitely. I think one of the really interesting things about certainly my experience and a lot of the cohort that I was with doing a PhD, I think, in fact, I can't think of a single person in that cohort that didn't at some point struggle with their mental health. So whether that was around, just the stress and the anxiety of the everyday, whether that was around confidence and imposter syndrome, whether that was around like the ability to self-manage and just get through. And so I think as a starting point to that, I would just put the caveat in of like, to be a researcher is already putting you so far ahead of a lot of the folks that are going into starting companies or working in business, just because of the resilience and the self-regulation that comes with having to do research. Like in and of itself, as Ella said, it can be a very isolating, a very you know, it doesn't get done if you don't get it done. It's all on you. So I think one of the big learnings for me in coming out of that was, I don't think when I was doing my PhD, I realized actually the full kind of skill set or capacity that I actually had. And I think I definitely had to navigate that imposter. And I think one of the big realizations of coming out of it was that actually research is so similar to entrepreneurship, and whether that's running your own business or joining a business. But, you know, I think certainly for the way Ella and I would look at things, especially coming out of Zinc, is you have a problem, you know, you have a research question, how might we do X? How might we create Y? How might we solve this? And you essentially go and find the answer. So I think for us, it's always taking a problem first approach, which means that you have your research question, you have your methodology. You know, we talk about user research, and that might be interviews, that might be data science, that might be some type of co-creation workshop, but they're all things we actually already know how to do. And actually do a lot better than a lot of people that are in business who haven't necessarily had the same like rigor and training. And so I think the translatability of that is huge, and something that we often forget about. So, you know, and similarly, when dealing with rejection, you know, as a researcher, you're not getting into conferences, you're not getting grants, your papers are getting rejected, you know. So I think, again, that resilience that comes with believing in something or having an idea, and having the grit to defend that idea, and the skill set to actually, you know, come up with a hypothesis, go and apply a bunch of different methods and methodologies to answer that question, and then come away with a solution, is like through and through what we've been trained to do for most of us, like a decade or more. So I think that actually, as a starting point, like, I don't even think people are starting. I think they're already ahead of where a lot of other folks are starting. It's, for me, the bigger thing was getting over the mental block, or having this idea of it being a career change. Or I know certainly I felt like I was very siloed as an academic. And I felt like, you know, I didn't know how to work in the real world. And I think it was actually around reframing my own narratives and my own ideas of what business was, and actually realizing how much an alignment and a complementarity there is between research and, yeah, enterprise. So I think in terms of summarizing that as a starting point, with the caveat of I don't think folks are already starting, I think they're already ahead. It would be one thing around, like, you know, just recognizing and owning like the full skill set and the resilience that you have. And also then I think about, like, you know, if you even have like a little bit of an inkling or like a nudging feeling that academia is maybe not for you, like lean into that and explore that. And if it turns out that it's wrong, fine, go back to academia, keep exploring what you're exploring. But it's worth exploring that, because I think, yeah, for me, I was certainly surprised at actually how many more opportunities there were beyond academia that I didn't realize there were.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Anna. I think especially the things you've said around kind of that imposter syndrome, you know, there's certainly things that we're trying to address and trying to support people across our institutions with, because, you know, they do have so many transferable skills, and it's actually just understanding how you then translate that into the business world. And I think also what you said about just keep exploring. I mean, I think, Ella, you're probably a perfect example of that. You're taking a pause with your PhD to explore something new. So yeah, if I could hand over to you, I don't know if you've got any specific advice or kind of learnings of your own.
Yeah, I mean, I'd completely echo everything Anna said. Just wanted to add to that potentially around the sort of themes of imposter syndrome, I guess, and about transferable skills. That one of the things that I really have struggled with in my PhD from the outset is that, you know, you've got sort of a long period of time, like 3 or 4 years is quite a long time for your mind to think about everything you want to get done. And also I think lots of people put a lot of pressure on themselves that they want to have produced the most pivotal piece of research that they've ever created, because it's sort of hyped up in your brain. And so therefore there's always more research questions to add. There's always another bit of method. There's always another bit, you know, another question, you can always add and add and add. And actually being able to prioritize and focus can then become really difficult. And I think it wasn't until I stepped away from that And I was in conversations with founders who didn't have, lots of the founders that Zinc work with have come from research backgrounds like Anna, but some of them haven't. And that they were sort of saying, okay, well, I want to answer this question. And I would come up with what I thought was a really, really beautiful plan of how they could answer those questions with research. And they'd sort of say, oh, well, I've only got like a day. Can you tell me how I can do this as quickly as possible? Or I've got no money, or I've whatever the restrictions were. And that really forced me to then prioritize, to say, okay, actually, what is the really, really important part of this, the critical method, the critical type of method or contribution of method or whatever you're talking about, that is going to make the difference between us understanding and being able to come up with an answer to this or not. And that might just be knowing that you can't answer it quite yet, but that you can get one step on that process, and then that will feed into something else. So it's about that prioritization of what you know and what you don't know, and what you can and can't answer quite yet, which has not only, I think, made me a much better researcher coming back into academia now, because I'm able to not get overwhelmed by all of the things you don't possibly know, but be much more sort of, critical in those decisions. But also, I think it's helped me understand better the type of researcher that I am and my values in research and the type of research that I want to create. Because particularly working in interdisciplinary teams, that's where you get that friction, right? Some people say, no, actually this, we have to keep this in. And then someone says, no, we don't. And you start to realize, or I found that I realized much more obviously to myself, the type of researcher that I want to be and the type of research I want to create. So yeah, not only would I say that all of the skills that you probably already have are transferable, but also that you're able to maybe see them a bit more clearly when they're put under stress, and that you can bring that back. So I think, yeah, you can move both ways.
Ella, I was just going to jump in on that. I think that's also, it made me think, one of the biggest things when I first started working, like doing non-research research, if you would, or like non-academic research, was the realization of how often we almost create our own paralysis with it. Because there's, obviously we want to follow, like, you know, there's this question of what do you compromise and what do you not? And, you know, I think your point around prioritization is such a powerful one, because, you know, for us, it was like ethics, always high priority, no compromise. Like time scale or methodology, have to compromise. And I found that that was a really interesting learning in the other way of actually realizing how quick we can actually get information, and this difference between like perfect and unfinished versus done and good enough. And I think for me, coming from research, that was a massive one. And again, I think especially when it comes to, you know, dissertations and postgraduate research, there's this emphasis on like, it always needs to be perfect, it always needs to be perfect, or I always need to do more, rather than like what's good enough to finish this and move on to the next thing, and actually then allows me to get somewhere rather than to leave it perfect but unfinished. So I think, yeah, that just kind of riffing off your point around prioritization, I think that's a really, really important one.
That's great. Thank you both. It's really lovely to hear how you've adapted, both of you, to kind of going from that academic kind of lifestyle and kind of the expectations to moving your skills into a business, but then having to adapt to those and change the way that you work and becoming a better researcher, like you said, Ella, which is really lovely to hear. I wondered if I could kind of build on that and just hear a bit about kind of maybe what the other challenges you found with making that transition, and you know, whether that's because things are more fast-paced, or whether it's kind of, like you say, having to reprioritize. Are there other things that you found quite challenging moving from an academic lifestyle into a business? If I go to you, Ella, first, and then come to you, Anna, is that all right?
Gives me time to think. It's perfect.
So I think there's a culture shift, and there's definitely different personalities, different backgrounds, different types of people are drawn to different types of work. I think that's probably the case moving between any sector. You're always going to have a certain amount of adjustment. personally, I found that really interesting and a really useful experience. I think I had lots of, well, yeah, I suppose stigmas, I guess, stereotypes about what entrepreneurs were and what they would look like. And I think that I had sort of thought it was essentially people who are obsessed with money and maybe a bit sort of hardball, or I don't know, uncaring. And that makes me sound like an awful person to say that I thought those things. But if I'm honest with myself, I probably did a little bit. And one of the things I really love about being in academia is all the amazing people that you get to meet from all over the world who are super passionate about these, like, sometimes quite niche topic areas and really knowledgeable about those. And I realized that all of those things are also in the social impact entrepreneurship space, and that there's lots of people who are really passionate and motivated and really care about doing good. And that actually not only being able to create a sustainable business model around that means that you can do more good. It's not a sort of parallel stream to something. They actually mutually reinforce one another. So you're not creating something that has positive impact, but then has to stop at the end of a grant and go in the bin. You're creating something that is self-sustaining in its own right and can grow, and so therefore can reach more people and do more good. And that was a real sort of light bulb moment for me, I guess. It made me realize a lot of my own prejudices. Yeah.
No, that's great. I think that's something we've come across. It is that stigma, but actually moving into a different sector is just as accessible to any sector, in particular academia. And it's partly about adapting, but it is actually there's still good people there doing good things, and that's what it is at the end of the day. So no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Ella. Anna, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just definitely echoing Ella as well. Like I struggled with something similar, and I remember going into it being very like suspicious maybe of people, being like, you know, is this just some like exploitation of others, and it's all around taking advantage, and like it's always about money. I think especially coming from like nonprofit sector and academia, there's this kind of like the big businesses, you know, and so I think for me, yeah, similarly had to go in and actually almost reframe what were, you know, biases or assumptions, some of which are true, some of which were completely untrue. You know, like any sector, you're going to have, you know, pros and cons. And so I think there was definitely an adaptation and a challenge to myself to be like, actually, not everybody here is like out to get somebody else, and a lot of the people certainly that I've met, you know, are doing phenomenal work and are actually having in some ways bigger impacts than being in other sectors, because they do, you know, as I said, have more freedom in terms of how they make decisions, how they allocate funds, in terms of, as Ella said, the sustainability of it, not like having an endpoint and then the project's over and like things just kind of disappear. So I think, yeah, just echoing that. I'd say the biggest thing for me in terms of two things, in terms of adapting or transitions, was, which we touched on already. The first one was around pace. So having to learn how to do hacky research rather than like dotting the I's and crossing the T research, but still making sure that it follows, again, like the ethics are non-negotiable. So I think that was a really big one of, you know, doing a PhD, you kind of go down a rabbit hole and you're like, great, I'm going to explore literature for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year, or 4 years later, I'm still exploring literature. Whereas this is like, you've got 1 week, 1 day, you've got 30 minutes, like learn as much as you can, figure out how to translate that to people who are coming from non-scientific backgrounds, make it accessible, and then make a decision. So I think originally I found that required a bit of an adjustment for me, because it almost felt like it went against not just like how I'd been taught it as academic, but also my own personality of liking like plans and structures and being able to get ahead and not always having to feel reactive. But on the flip side, I think it's been a massive, massive learning curve, and has really, really improved my skill set overall in a way that allows me to, you know, going back to what we said earlier, prioritize, but also to do more and to come up with more answers and to challenge myself to actually communicate technical information in a non-technical way, which is actually really hard. And then the other thing that I would say was a big change was around, how do I say this? Yeah, I think for us specifically, because we work around sex and a taboo topic, it was learning how to simultaneously be researcher and be objective, but also be able to be like a work in progress and a participant myself, and to experience the issues that folks were going through. I think a lot of the time with academia, a lot of our research is around like objectivity and you know, trying to almost be an observer. And I think there was a big learning around actually giving yourself permission to experience in the same way as the community you're dealing with and working with and empowering is experiencing. And that to me was really powerful, because it was a very different position. Rather than kind of maintaining that objectivity, it was fully immersing yourself in the everyday struggles. And I found that was a really intense, but also very powerful shift, and something that I hadn't had before in a lot of the work that I did.
Yeah. No, oh, amazing. That's really interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us. We've got a few more minutes before I want to go to the live Q&A. Just as a reminder to attendees, please do feel free to start submitting questions if you've got any for Anna and Ellen. We'll try and cover as many as possible. Before we do that, I just wanted to actually have a think more about, you know, maybe advice that you would give our PhD and ECRs, but also what advice you might give your younger self. So kind of, you know, reflecting back maybe on, you know, even before your PhD and, you know, when you were studying, you know, is there any advice that you would want to give yourself, you know, 5-10 years ago? If I'll start with you, Anna, this time, please.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about like practical, actionable tips. So one of the things I already mentioned, but just to reiterate it, is again that like done and good enough is better than perfect and unfinished. Like across all walks of things, that's been such a massive learning for me. I think another one in terms of like mantras, if you would, is that relates to the imposter syndrome and kind of the inner critic. Like I think how you see yourself is not how others see you. So I think keep in mind that, you know, anytime you end up being critical, if you're not, fantastic, you're already steps ahead of me. But actually just like give yourself the benefit of the doubt, and actually trust in the skill set you already have, and allow yourself to see yourself the way in which others see you. And then in terms of like actual like practical tips, if folks are looking at different careers or looking to, yeah, just explore anything. I think certainly for me, so I was at Oxford, and I know through the, didn't study business whatsoever. So my background has like nothing to do with business, had never done business before. But through the university and actually through the business school, there was a lot of free programs you could do around like intro to entrepreneurship, or even going and talking to other companies that were startups there. So I think when I started thinking about it, even just like dabbling in some of the free resources and the, you know, whether it's programs, courses, workshops, talks, other kind of people that were starting businesses, was a really good way of giving me a bit more confidence to then kind of do the next step. So yeah, I would say if there's even, you know, as we said, like an inkling of curiosity, explore it. You don't have to commit to anything, but I think it's worth exploring what else there is and drawing on a lot of the resources that do exist already and that are often free. And I think also like even browsing different like job postings and just starting to look at the skills that they have in there, looking at like what those roles would look like. I found for me that was really interesting in terms of like getting that confidence of saying, oh, actually, like I could do a lot of this stuff, and this actually sounds really interesting, and it's not that far from what I'm doing right now. So this would be a really easy way to get my foot in the door and kind of make that transition. So yeah, looking at resources that already exist, and then exploring, just exploring everything from like job postings to different companies, to different roles, and seeing if there's anything there that resonates.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Anna. And same question to you, Ella. I just also wanted to add in if there was anything that you felt that might be missing from when you've done your PhD that could have supported you more with moving into a business role. Kind of on top of what advice you would give, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up on something that Anna mentioned about like scientific objectivity, which I think is really interesting because like I was really struck. So at Zinc, every week you have what they call stand-ups, where all the entrepreneurs get to the front and you essentially say sort of why this problem, why this solution, product, service, whatever it is you're creating, and why me. And I think you get very trained in academia to be able to explain the problem, you know, explain the data, what's going on, explain your research questions, why you're adding to that, and all of these things, etc., etc. But you never explain why me, really. And if you're doing that in terms of a career sense, you might say, okay, like I have these skills in X or Y research methods and this is my background, but it's all very like objective, essentially. You know, your CV is something which is I felt like it felt different or distinct somehow from my own personal motivations or ambitions or like views on the world. And I think that I had internalized this idea that actually my research topic is ultimately fueled by a passion for something and something that I care about and I love. But I think I had internalized this idea that that wasn't a good reason to be doing something because it wasn't objective. And I had to justify it in other terms for good reason. But then being in that startup world, when we realized that actually like your personal passion is a fine reason, and if anything, it's probably the best reason to do something. And so that allowed me to reevaluate some of those career decisions and make them much more personal to me and who I wanted to be and the things that I valued and my own identity, which I think helped immensely in terms of the advice that I now seek from people. I think that I had potentially been too easily swayed by other voices who probably had different ultimate end goals than what I did, or valued different things. Whereas now I think like ultimately you're going to be doing the jobs that you end up in. You're going to be living your life. So it sounds very like deep and philosophical now, but I think, yeah, my best advice to myself, my prior self, would be to like listen to your gut a bit more and do what you want to do, rather than what is necessarily expected or on a certain trajectory or what fits with what you've done previously on paper. I would also say, similar to what Anna said, like be curious, explore, have fun. We're all probably going to live for a very long time, so you can try lots of different stuff. And there's lots of stuff out there. There's loads of organizations, including Zinc, that run lots of events that you can go to for free. There's lots of existing resources. Yeah, where else was I talking about? I think that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. I think it's just getting a sense, isn't it, of things that you would recommend now, either to your previous self or to people out there. Because one of the questions we actually had pre-submitted was actually how you felt when you left university. Now, I'm not sure if they're meaning after an undergrad or a PhD, but I wondered if I could maybe kind of get your thoughts, both of you, on how you felt when you, if we maybe say after an undergrad, how you felt leaving university then, and kind of how it was that you decided maybe to go and do a PhD. If I start with you, Ella, would that be okay?
I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do when I finished my undergrad, and if I'm honest, probably felt pretty lost and confused. I think I still don't have any idea what I'm going to be doing in 20 years. I think I've just learned to love that feeling and learned to enjoy it and have fun with it, and to create opportunities to reach out to people. That's the other bit of advice I would suggest as well. I think that part of the reason that academia can become quite siloed is that people only talk to people in those bubbles. And one of the things that I was frustrated about was that it felt like there was this fantastic community of gerontologists talking about things that we've known about for 20 plus years, but no one else was talking to them. And then I realized actually how easy it is to reach out to people on LinkedIn, on Twitter, go to an event, get their email and just say hi, and how much you can learn from that about completely different people, but then also how much that can, like, you can give, and those exchanges. And I think that in general, entrepreneurs or people who start businesses are, they have far more confidence than I think some researchers do. So they just put themselves out there. And I think that's something that is a good skill to have and a good skill to bring back for sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ella. I'd like to go over to you, Anna, but I just want to add something to that because we've had a question from the audience which relates nicely with that question. And it's actually around, where did you find the money to help set yourself up? Do you have any advice for someone who is likely to commence with their own startup post-PhD, and where that startup can only have an impact by running on a charitable basis? So am I okay to come to you about that one, Anna?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I can 100% empathize with this. So, empathize with this. To give a little bit of context, so my PhD was fully funded by me. As an international student at Oxford was not a particularly affordable experience. And there's a whole bunch of stuff around that as well. But I think coming out of it, it was the dread of student loans, of not having an income. It was the sense of like, was it all worth it? It was a sense of like, am I going to be able to buy groceries by the end of the month? Quite literally, it was like beans on toast getting to the end of it. And so I think one of the things for me around, so there's a couple of things around funding. One is that there's a lot of, depending on how you go about it, there's a lot of opportunities to actually tap into like incubators or startup programs, whether that's like dedicated to like an incubator like Zinc, which is dedicated to startups, or whether that's through like Barclays startup program. So, and then also depending on which kind of industry your startup would sit within, there's also a lot of stuff available for those specifically. So for example, if it's around like climate change, if it's around health tech, so you can find not only like business building programs, incubators, that kind of thing that often offer, tricky one to say, stipends, but also you can find like awards or grants or whatnot on specific domains, depending on which one you're looking at. So I would say, well, certainly for me, it felt like the pressure of financial strain is real. There is a lot of ways of getting creative and still being able to do what you want to do. So I'm actually so glad that I didn't let that stop me, because if it had, I think my mental health would have been way worse, because I would have been doing something because of financial kind of limitations rather than spending an effort trying to figure out how to get creative and to actually do the thing I wanted to do. So yeah, I'd say around that one, like there's actually so many options of where to get money. It's just a matter of time and kind of creativity in finding those. And then the other piece I would say around that, just as a caveat, is like, we often romanticize starting our own businesses. Like, it's like, yeah, you're gonna have all the flexibility in the world and you're your own boss, and it's like really low key. Like it's not. So I think like I think it was Steve Jobs, but somebody said like only crazy people start businesses, because like you compromise on your finances, you compromise on your relationships, you compromise on your health, you compromise on like, you know, which is actually where I think it's really similar to a PhD or to research, because you don't tap out. Like at the end of the day, you don't go home from doing research and say like, oh yeah, cool, I'm going to stop thinking about that, like my day's over. And again, that's where I think it's really similar. But I think the kind of caveat I would say is like, on the flip side of that, like whilst it's so much work and there's so many compromises, the rewards and the amount of like personal growth, the amount of like self-awareness, the amount of freedom, the amount of like autonomy that comes with that was so worth it. But it's not easy, and you will have to be making compromises, and some of those financial, some of those personal, some of those around your health. But if you have like the ability to kind of power through that, like you would doing a PhD, the rewards at the end of it are huge.
That's great. It's really interesting to hear the realism behind it. And I think, like you say, you do think, oh, I'll just start a business and I'll be away. And actually, there are just a lot of things to think about that kind of come with that. So thank you for that. I'm just going to see, I don't think we've had any further questions from the audience. So I've actually got another one which was pre-submitted. And you both talked quite a bit about your values and how they've helped support kind of what it is that you now do in your kind of day-to-day roles. And somebody's asked, how do you know that the chosen career is exactly what you are passionate about or interested in? And they've asked about whether you've had work experience that has kind of fed into those interests. And I just wondered if that resonates with either of you, and whether that's those interests from kind of earlier ages has actually helped lead you to where you are now. So working with Zinc and working with Furley. So Ella, if I could open that one up to you first, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in sort of trying by doing, essentially, and experimenting, which I think we've both sort of touched on quite a lot throughout this. I think ultimately jobs are evolving so quickly now, right? And the jobs we might be doing in 30 years might not exist yet. Hopefully not, and hopefully they're good and exciting. So I don't think that it's possible to sort of set out, you know, a list of criteria, tick those off and then decide your final career. I think you have to experiment. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to keep, like, I kept quite a detailed log of things. This is going to make me sound very academic now, but like things that I liked and things that I didn't like, observations about my everyday work. And that involved like working styles, like how long my day was, how exhausted I felt, those sorts of things, but also the people that I liked to work with, the contribution I was making or not, pay, the whole range of things in a sort of work diary with goals, which I think has really helped me to continually evaluate different work experiences I've had and get a better idea of where I might want to be, or the things that I want to change or don't, and my negotiables or non-negotiables moving forward.
That's great. That's a really lovely way of thinking about it, and a great kind of resource to make for yourself. I really like that idea. Thank you.
And I think it's a nice way of being kind to yourself as well. You know, if you set out with something, especially when doing lots of short-term project work, when you might be working for 3 months or 6 months or something, if you can set out and say, okay, I want to do this because this is something that I want to learn, or I want to explore, or I want to try, and have a couple of personal development goals essentially, and then at the end you can see where you've got, and often you've achieved far more than you had ever set out to achieve. But if you can't see where you began, you can be a bit harsher on yourself, or more harsh on yourself than you might do if you don't have that record.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. And Anna, are you happy to also share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, okay, before I jump in, bring me back to the original question so I can make sure that I'm answering it with the best of the ways that I had on there.
Yep, no worries. Sorry, let me just get it. So how do you know that the chosen career is exactly what you're passionate about or interested in?
Cool. So that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. I think, so a couple of things on that. One, for me, like I had absolutely no idea. Like, again, kept going back to, like, I did a PhD because I was like, I don't know what else to do, so I should probably do a PhD. Like, which is actually, I think, how a lot of us end up in there. You know, the folks who know, you know, the folks who know going into it, I'm like, God, like, kudos to you. But for me, it was like a backup plan. And then I think as I was getting towards the end of my PhD, it was like, shit. I still don't know, what am I supposed to do? And I can't do like another PhD, or do I do another PhD, or do I stay in academia, or like, do I just keep going? And so I think, you know, going back to that, I guess I would challenge, or I would flag that I don't actually think we need to know or have like one career. I think the kind of narrative or the story of having one career is one that's certainly for me was kind of like imposed based on like older generations, or like the society idea of like what it meant to like have a job. I think there's a difference between a job and a career. But I think for me, it was like, I think similarly to Ella, was looking at like what gives me energy and what takes away energy. And I think it was more around filtering out like what I don't want to do, because the idea of like having to figure out what I do want to do felt this like overwhelming, impending question that I was just like, I don't know how to answer, you know. And you get that thing of like, what are you going to do after your PhD, or like, what do you want to do as a career? And it's like, I have no idea. And every time somebody asks that, I panic, because like I feel guilty for not knowing, or I feel like I'm lesser, or I should know. But actually, like, the reality is like people rarely have an answer to that. And I think for me, it was around getting comfortable with the idea of like saying, I don't know, or there might be 5 careers, or that's going to change. And actually, I hope that I've got multiple ones. And, you know, the same way that we're evolving over time, I'd hope that my careers evolve over time. Otherwise, to me, there's like a lack of growth in that. Going back to the purpose point of it, I think whilst I didn't know what I wanted to do, I definitely knew that there were certain themes that kept coming up. So, you know, one of them that has always, for as long as I can remember, been in there is advocacy. You know, I've also always been really interested in gender equality, stuff around kind of mental health surface. As I struggled with my own mental health during my PhD, that became something that I felt more passionately about. So I think, yeah, I guess I would challenge back to that question, like, why do we have to know? Like, why do we have to have one thing? And is it more a matter of like figuring out the patterns or the themes, combining that with what gives us energy and like what suits us now, or what suits us in like the immediate future? With regards to the work we're doing specifically, like, as I said, I had no background in business. Like, we're essentially, feel like I've done a second PhD in psychotherapy, and I've like never studied psychotherapy. And that's yet like the area that I'm working in. So I think it's also the ability to like take those themes and then trust that you can learn as you go. Like, you know, we're researchers, we know how to figure information out. And I think there's also the fact, like in this one, in our instance, it was related to like my own personal experiences with it and my business partner's personal experiences with it. So both of us had to navigate sexual violence. And I think that was something that then led to a bigger thought around like the topic itself, even though it's not something we necessarily studied. So yeah, I think it's recognizing the themes, it's challenging the narrative of like, you know, when somebody says, what are you going to do? Or like, what do you want to be? It's like, why are you asking? I can be many things. I don't know yet, and that's okay. But these are the things I'm interested in, and these are the things that give me energy, and these are the things I absolutely don't want to do. And to me, that's more the kind of, yeah, rhythm that I would go by.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. That's yeah, really interesting to hear, and thanks for all your honesty with that. We've just got time probably for one final question. It's from someone in the audience, and I'm sort of going to just try and phrase it, kind of wrap things up a little. But They're actually saying that I'm thinking of starting a business after I complete my PhD, and they want to know, are there any things that they could be doing over the next few years that could help them get into a good position? And I'm also thinking it doesn't necessarily have to be that someone is starting their own business, but maybe wanting to consider moving out of academia. Now, I know we've covered this a little bit, but if there's just any kind of closing thoughts from either of you, it would be really great to kind of hear those before we go to Laura. So Ella, could I start with you on that, please?
Yeah,
The heavy sigh, Ella.
You're almost there.
no. So the reason behind that sigh is because I worry that sometimes at these events you end up going away with a long list of things that you're supposed to be doing on top of finishing a PhD.
Yeah.
And that can be overwhelming, right? And so I guess my first point would be just just try and focus on doing your PhD, and that's probably enough, and that's probably a lot, and don't stress yourself out about trying to do 1,001 things on top of it, which is maybe advice that I should listen to myself. Then I would say connections and networks, and that networking doesn't have to be sleazy. It can just be meeting people who are interesting and share similar interests to you, and you never know where that might lead. I've been amazed at some of the people who I've met, and then that's turned into side projects which might have gone nowhere, but then might have turned into something. And you can create work, create businesses, create opportunities that completely amaze you where they come from when you make good connections with other people. Yeah, and then I'd probably also say that I guess picking up on some of the themes that we were talking about right at the beginning, about how this line between academia and entrepreneurship is definitely in terms of skill set, not really very, it's very permeable, right? And completely transferable. So I guess I would try and reiterate that you probably don't have to go and do a whole load of extra stuff on top of that. You maybe just have to do some of that work on reframing the skills you've already got, trying to think about how your current research might lead into something. If you want to keep working in that area, you may not. And I think also in terms of the money side of things, there's lots of, research grants about engagement for research projects, or generating impact from research projects, or other grants and various things which are in the academic space, but you can pitch to be part of the early stages in terms of seed funding of a business, right? Proof of concept type work. So yeah, I'd probably say lots of the stuff that you're maybe doing already, but just with a different frame of mind in terms of long-term goal or output.
That's great, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. We don't need to be putting more pressure on ourselves when we've probably already got most of the skills that are needed. And like you say, reframing it is a really lovely way of putting it. So thank you. Anna, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things come to mind. So I completely agree on the getting through one thing at a time. It's no small undertaking doing research. That being said, if folks are kind of getting towards the end of that, or deciding that maybe they don't want to finish that and that's not for them, or looking at doing that shift, I think the best piece of advice that I was given was actually from my brother, and it's infuriating but also just so true, of just do it. I think we have a tendency, we as in academics, and I think this is also part of the way in which we've been trained, of having to have the plan laid out, have the project proposal, have the timeline, have the steps. And I think realistically, in some ways, that can be a bit of a handicap, in that, it spends a lot of time doing the planning rather than just what's the question I want to answer? What's a really, really easy way to go out and see if that's interesting to people, or that there's an opportunity there, and let me just go and try and test that. So yeah, I think the kind of not overthinking it and just figuring out like, how do I keep this as simple as possible, and how do I actually like forget about having to have a plan and just go out and try. I think that's where I would kind of start with that. And then alongside that, I think off the kind of point around networking, I think there's also something for me around gaining confidence moving into that was around developing literacy of the space. So something around like reading books around it. There's some really phenomenal podcasts, reading like Medium posts, blog posts, etc. I think that helped me with the kind of imposter side of things and growing the confidence to feel that I learned the language that people were speaking and started to understand the processes and to kind of like make sense of the landscape, which then gave me that extra push to be able to like go and have those conversations with those people. So yeah, I would say get informed and just start reading, start listening, start watching, and see if that's something of interest to you. I also was just going to quickly answer the question on the different topics, careers now in your 30s. I'm 33 and I'm still figuring it out. So, you know, my brother's 40 next year and he's just started another company and has changed careers. So I think it's, this idea that we need to be certain ages, like it doesn't matter whether you're 19 and trying it, whether you're 50 and trying it. And I know certainly with my community, there's like hundreds of people that sit across that age range. So it's, I think it's actually quite normal to change careers and to think about switching things up. It's just that we've been fed this narrative of like the one career, the one job, and you follow that through your life. So I'd say age irrelevant. It's more around like, does it give you energy? Are you interested in it? And can you just go and give it a try?
Brilliant, thank you. I think really positive notes to end on. So thank you both of you. And just seeing some of the comments from people coming in, and you know that they seem to be finding it really, really useful and inspiring. So thank you so much to both of you for your honesty today and for sharing your stories. It's really fantastic to hear what you're both up to, and you know, just you both sound incredibly successful to me. So just keep doing what you're doing. I just want to invite Laura in to talk about kind of what she's put together. I know we're just slightly over time, so if you can stay on the line, please do. If not, we will be sharing Laura's illustrations afterwards, so you will get to see them, but it's really great to hear Laura talk about what she's captured. So if you can stay, please do. So Laura, if you could join us, please.
Hi everyone. Ella, Anna, thank you so much for your thoughts. And as a fellow ex-academic and early 30s woman, I recognised a lot of myself in what you were saying. Hence the reason why imposter syndrome is the largest thing on the screen in the centre, because I really resonated with what you were saying about that. So we have Ella's work on the left and Anna's work on the right. So we explored a bit about Zinc and a bit about Furley, and the kind of the commonalities across them were about this fast-paced environment where you're using evidence to make a real impact, and in particular kind of having activism through business, but in a way that's more autonomous than perhaps you would with a funded research project. And then if we look on Ella's side on the left, about advice. So I really liked what Ella said about learning prioritization and thinking about how you can turn research around more quickly and in a more targeted way. And also learning what kind of academic she wanted to be as a result of stepping outside of academia and trying something different. And also challenging the preconceptions of entrepreneurs and businesses as, for want of a better phrase, kind of all dicks, which they're not. Some of them can actually be quite lovely and they're all doing grand things. And again, Ella talked about adapting, and I really liked what you were saying, Ella, about answering why me. So actually, not only, you know, why is this research important? Why is this problem important? It's why am I the best person to solve it? And actually reconnecting with your passion for things and your curiosity by letting go of this rigorous academic objectivity all the time. And then if we cross over to Anna's side around femtech and being mindful about sex and digital activism, there were some great things about skills here and transferable skills. So realizing that the challenge of doing a PhD actually equips you with so many of the skills that will make you a good entrepreneur. So resilience, dealing with rejection, being able to focus, problem solving, self-motivation, and also realizing that basically being a researcher and being an entrepreneur are kind of one and the same thing, just the skills are applied slightly differently. And there were some great ideas around adapting to the pace of the work, being able to be empathetic with your research subjects rather than being objective all the time, and also learning to communicate technical language and technical ideas clearly. And then kind of crossing over with this imposter syndrome that both of you talked about. Ella talked about, you know, having the confidence to put yourself out there and network and kind of see what's out there and not worry about having a plan. And then Anna talked about believe in your abilities and see yourself as others do. Stop giving ourselves a hard time, and that recognizing that done and good enough is better than perfect, and don't romanticize entrepreneurship because it's hard. And I can absolutely back that comment up as well. And also recognizing that you need to learn your own values and become quite self-aware to know where you want to go after your PhD and your kind of university career, so that using those opportunities to take on smaller projects so you know what turns you on, what gives you energy, and who you like to work with, and kind of giving yourself permission to explore, and you don't have to get it right, and that your career will inevitably change. So in a nutshell, that's what we've just chatted about, and this will be available at the link that is in the chat, and I'll also post it on Twitter too @niftyfoxcreative.com. But thank you very much for having me.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Laura. And as always, fantastic interpretation of what we've been talking about. There was a lot to capture there, but you've done a fantastic job. Yeah, so that's everything. So once again, thank you to Ella and Anna. You've been fantastic to speak with, and it's been a real privilege to really learn more about what it is both of you do. Thank you to Martin Bostock from our AV team, and thank you to Lucinda Burrow from the University of Sheffield for helping pull this session together and being there in the background. And thank you to all our attendees. And for those of you who've submitted questions, we will be sharing Laura's illustrations, as I mentioned, and we may share the recording. I will confirm that at a later date, just dependent on whether we want to do a bit of editing, just so you've got kind of clear-cut answers. All right, but thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you all shortly. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.